Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Deeper Than Know podcast. I'm super excited to have Brian Wright as my guest. I was on his podcast almost 2 years ago. He's an amazing person. You made me feel incredible because you were one of the first people to ask me to be on a podcast, which built tons of confidence. And then the magazine that you released, and you threw my face on it. And I'm telling you, like, the again, back to the confidence, the emotional I'm like, man, if Brian thinks I'm a cool guy, maybe I am. So I appreciate you believing in me. It's made a huge difference, now that I'm looking back 2 years later. So I want to start off by thanking you. And then
Oh, yeah.
second off, I'd love to if you can give us a few minutes of kind of your background.
Sure. Well, you're very welcome. You are worthy for sure. A little bit about my background. I always wanted to be a teacher. I always wanted to be a writer, and I've gotten to do both of those things in my life. I ended up teaching at a small business college when I lived in Lincoln, Nebraska back in the 90s. It's called Lincoln School of Commerce. It's no longer open, but I got to teach English composition, business math, and public speaking. So those were all required courses, and so it was my job to make them fun because you had to take my class before you graduated. And if you waited until the very last minute to take my class and you weren't doing well or you got scared, you didn't have an option but to complete the class because you weren't going to graduate on time. So I always encourage people to take the class before you really had to if you could get it scheduled in.
Hmm.
But I enjoyed doing that. I enjoyed helping people express themselves. I enjoyed helping people become more confident in the skills that they do have because a lot of people don't like to speak and they really don't like to write. And a lot of people really don't like to do math. And so I hope that I did a decent job. I think I did a pretty decent job of doing all that. And then in terms of writing, I figured if I could help people write term papers and research papers, I could help them write their books. And so it started as coaching, and then I ended up ghostwriting. And so I do both of those things. Most of my clients say, just take it from me. Just let me write your book, like write my book for me, please. And so I do. And I really, really actually enjoy that. I also publish a magazine called Ultimate Achievers Magazine. I did a rebrand about a year or so ago. And I've been doing that since December 2017. And I do my radio show, Success Profiles Radio, since January 2012. So consistency is very, very important. If you want to be in the top whatever percent, top 10%, top 1%, whatever you strive to do, being consistent is the first thing. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. And when you are out there consistently, people start to seek you out. They want to be a part of your platform. And so I've gotten that experience. So I'm happy and grateful for it.
Oh, that's awesome. And I'm writing down questions and then you answered the question. I was going to say, well, what did you like about teaching? And you answered that on the emotional level of I like seeing other people express themselves, gain confidence, gain skills. And public speaking, I remember I hated my public speaking class as well. And I'm like looking back, I'm like, yeah, that was very nerve-wracking. But the fact that I did it, the confidence that it instilled was huge. So first question for you, in the public speaking, both yourself and your students, I mean, how have you seen people being able to overcome that fear, conquering that fear to do public speaking, and how that has opened up doors in your life and potentially your students' lives?
For my students, the best way to overcome fear is to just jump in. And so on the very first day, I made everyone stand up and introduce themselves for a minute or two. It shocked them that they had to stand up on the very first day, but you got it out of the way. There was no dreading it. And then the first real speaking assignment was do a demonstration speech. So you're showing us how to do something that you already know how to do very, very well. So the undertone here is that I want to give people small wins as early as possible. And when you're working with people, especially when you're coaching them or teaching them, you want to give people small wins as soon as possible. And you do coaching too, and I'm sure that you probably agree that that's a great strategy.
Absolutely. Um, with public speaking being such a like most people don't like it, right?
Yeah.
Where does that come from? Why is human nature like the default? And you'll know this better than me, but I would say you put 10 college students and say, how many of you guys are comfortable public speaking?
Mhm.
And probably none of them will raise their hand. Maybe one of them in a small setting. I don't know what the percentage is, but what is that? What's stemming? Why are we scared to speak publicly?
I think people have a fear of looking incompetent or ridiculous in front of their friends or in front of people in general. And giving them confidence, like I try to do early on, helps squash that as much as possible. But
That was my next question was, and
yeah,
then how do you, what mindset or tools or philosophies are you teaching them? And you talked about confidence.
hmm
I mean, yeah, dive into that a little bit more. What are you doing to build that confidence and how are you getting them to see, hey, if you're confident in this area, it's going to
hmm
transfer to public speaking?
well, public speaking for many people is going outside of your comfort zone. And so, what I want to do is put people in their comfort zone within this box of public speaking. And so, I encourage them, especially for a demonstration speech, to show us how to do something that you know how to do very, very well. Because you are the subject experts. No one's going to dispute that you know your topic. I'll give you a very quick example. When I was in graduate school, I got to teach a class at the University of Nebraska, and it was public speaking. And I had a student from Japan, and everyone else in the class was American. Her demonstration speech was on how to use chopsticks. And so she made three posters that showed different hand positions, and she brought, I think, 10 chopsticks, 10 pairs of chopsticks. And she asked me at the end of the speech, do I have time to pass these out? And I said, you know what? One of our speakers is absent today. Yes, there is extra time. You can pass out chopsticks. And so she put her visual aids, her graphics back against the board, and then she would walk around between people, and if they had the position wrong, she would, physically maneuver their hands and show them what they were doing. But she had so much fun, and the students enjoyed it too. And she said, "Do you want to try?" I said, "No, just this is your moment. You go ahead." I was in the back of the room just watching it and taking it in. They were very, very welcoming to her. I imagine coming from a completely different country and taking a class like public speaking in English, which is probably not your native language, is scary
Yeah.
enough. But
Yep.
giving her the opportunity to interact with other students in the class with a topic that she knew very, very well, I think really, really helped. And at the end of the semester, she wrote an evaluation. I am the only, I tell them to submit these anonymously, but she says, I am the only foreign student in class, and he made me feel very comfortable. I'm like, okay, I know which one you are. But it was a really fun experience, and giving people an opportunity to win makes my heart glad.
Yeah, I've recorded, I've been a year and a half, 80 something episodes in, and I promise you that I haven't started a podcast by saying, "Hey, thank you for helping me with my own personal confidence." And
Mhm.
that is just whatever came out for whatever reason because I think that's true. And then the whole conversation so far is like, "Hey, that's what I do." Well, you're doing a freaking good job because I wasn't your student and you did it for me. So I love that it's not a job, it's a passion. And I
Yeah.
think that's the key. Finding that passion, making it a job, or turning your job into a passion and
Yeah.
finding a lot more joy and fulfillment.
Exactly. And sometimes when people tell me their dream is to write a book, which I help people do, sometimes they come from a place of not really knowing what they want their book to be about or wondering, will anyone actually read this or will anyone care? Well, yes, I do believe that everyone has a message that they can share. And the longer that you wait to write your book, the longer that someone who needs your brilliance won't get to experience it. And so we might spend the first part of our conversation talking about what your book might actually be about. And sometimes when they're confused and they have several ideas, I tell them, I think you probably have more than one book idea here. So let's just pick one.
And then do you walk them through that process as well?
hmm Absolutely. We walk
All
through the process of, picking the topic and putting together an outline, and I tell them to figure out what stories they want to share, and I tell them to place the story within whichever chapter is most appropriate so that you're not telling the same story three different times in the book. Because then I
Yeah.
have to wonder which way did you tell it best? Where does it actually fit? And it can be very confusing to the reader to think, you told this story two chapters ago. Why are you telling it again? And if it's not apparent, then it begins to cause some confusion for your reader. So we want it to be pretty straightforward. We want it to be easily accessible, and we want people to want to finish reading the book. So we try to make it as crystal clear as we can.
What is the number one reason or the number three reasons, whatever it is, why are people writing books? Is it more like a legacy? I want to leave something, for those after me. Is it
Yeah.
I want personal branding and credibility because I'm an Amazon bestseller? Maybe it's getting leads for, a business. What have you found out are the number one, two, and three reasons, I guess.
Those are all legit. I think a lot of people start by telling me, I just want to tell my story. And I tell them that's a good goal. Your friends and your family will buy the book by default, but after that, who cares? The other 8 billion people in the world, what will cause them to want to read your book? And so now we have to think a little bit deeper. Why are we writing the book? So, is it because you want to generate leads for your business? Is it because you want to lead people into your community? Think of Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad. If you've read the book, you know that he sprinkles very generously references to his cash flow game. He wants you to buy his cash flow game. And now with, the internet being a lot more prominent now than it was when he wrote the book, I think you can play cash flow for free. But the idea is he was steering people toward an offer. And so I will ask my clients, what do you want to steer people to? Do you want them to hire you to be a coach? Do you want them to hire you to speak on their stage? Do you want to invite them to buy multiple copies of your book? Are you inviting them to a retreat or to an event? And those are all legitimate reasons. T. Harv Eker, when he wrote Secrets of the Millionaire Mind, his whole agenda was to invite you to his team's 3-day free event, which took place over the course of a weekend. Now, what was his end game? Well, while you're at his free event, his team is going to hardcore close you on buying his coaching programs, his Quantum Leap programs, his next steps to study with him and his team. And they're very aggressive about it. But the numbers work. So they can afford to put on free events all over the country because they know the numbers will work. So what do you want people to do, think, believe, or act after they're done reading your book? And we explore that and we gear the book accordingly.
And anytime you have all these thoughts in your head and they're half-assed thoughts until you put them into paper, and that's what coaches are so good, or a ghostwriter, which is really you coaching them on how to get their ideas out, because it's like, wait, I thought I was doing it for this, but now Brian's questioning me and that actually doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
It made sense in my brain, it doesn't make sense in his brain, it's probably not making sense in anybody else's brain. So just the fact of, I mean, like goal setting, you write it down, your science shows you're XYZ more
Mm-hmm.
likely to achieve it. And that message, there's no way that somebody can write a book, go through your process, and afterwards not be able to convey that same message and on podcasts or speaking on stages or as a leader, family, whatever. And I think that that's a big hidden gem that a lot of people don't see as a benefit of writing and getting your story out there.
Absolutely. And I do believe that, like I said, everyone does have something to say. And a lot of people minimize what they've accomplished, or they minimize the thing that they know a lot about. They think that their expertise area is common knowledge. No, it is not. If your book, I'll just pick an out of the box topic. If your book is about how to code, oh, no one would want to read that because everyone knows how to do it. No, I promise. You're like one of like very few people in the world that probably know how to do this. And then the
Yeah.
other thing too is if people can find information about how to do things that you're good at for free online, why are they buying your book? They're buying it for you. They're buying it for your stories. They're buying it for your point of view, and they're buying it because you have something, hopefully, to offer once the book is done. People think that the book is the end of the journey and ta-da, I'm out in the world as a published author. But no, that's just the beginning. And when
Yeah.
people publish a book and they launch it, they publish it and then they publicize it and promote it on launch day, and then they don't say a word about it again. I'm like, no, 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 no. You don't quit feeding your baby the day after it's born. This is your
Yep.
baby and it's yours forever. So you have to promote it.
Yeah. And you spoke earlier about teaching and helping others and getting fulfillment on seeing the progression, which is now you're doing in ghostwriting. Walk me through kind of that timeline. And you started teaching. How long were you doing that? When did you start ghostwriting? And was that
Yeah.
transition very easy because you already found your passion in defining that passion? And I like to help people tell their story and express themselves.
Yeah. The transition wasn't immediate. I was teaching in the 90s. And then I moved out to Arizona and I stayed there for 26 years. I started in the call center world because that was the lowest hanging fruit. The job I moved out to Arizona for turned out not to be much of a job. in retrospect, I may not have moved if I would have known in advance that it wasn't going to turn into anything. But I was there and I figured it out. And in a couple of places that I landed, I ended up having a training job created especially for me because I was rocking and rolling on the phones.
Hmm.
And I've had multiple roles in the various companies I worked for. I was a supervisor in more than one company. I did payroll in one company for 3 locations and 400 employees every week. I was a trainer in a couple different places. I was in quality assurance. I did everything except own the company.
Hmm.
And so there were a lot of things that I did enjoy about that experience, but I realized there's a lot more to my life than this. And after I wrote my first book in 2009 about student leadership, I realized after that point, you know what? I wrote a book, I taught English composition, I've taught public speaking. Why can't I just take the classroom experience and apply it to the real world? And so I just started declaring I help people write their books. I just started telling people that, even though I didn't have any clients yet. I wasn't lying. It is something that I had experience in. If I could do it for myself, I can certainly help others, especially with my teaching background. But I just started affirming to the world that this is what I do. And it took a few months. And I think 2016 was my first client. And I ended up helping him for free. He said, look, you don't have a portfolio, you don't have testimonials, and I don't have money. Can we just trade? And I said, yes. And sometimes you have to do something for free once. And
Absolutely.
after that, I started getting some clients slowly but surely. And then 2022 was my best year. And 2023 was a little more difficult. The economy crashed. And I think people were holding on to their money quite a bit more last year. But I'm still here and I'm still
Yeah.
loving what I do.
Uh, Giving out products for free. I mean, that's it's a whole business model. You know, that's how. I mean, you just mentioned the 3 day free course.
Mhm.
And I think that a lot of times we don't get started because we're like, man, it's how do I find my first person that's going to pay me 5 grand, 10 grand, 20 grand? And it's like, well, you don't need to just get testimonials
Mhm.
and do discounted. Like when we started selling franchises, we did first 5 people to buy franchises, 10 grand.
Mm.
And then we got 5 sales very quickly. And then it started rolling. And then the franchise fee was 30 grand. And then you gain more traction. Then we raised to 40 and then to 50. But it started with 10, and within a year, it kind of 5x. But I do think that is a huge business principle that's often overlooked. Like, just get freaking started, do it for
Mhm.
free, pay them to do it. Like, get the practice out there, focus on the
Mhm.
skill, and then the money will follow. So I love that you brought that up.
Yeah,
Shifting
and
gears. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, I was going to say I'm certainly charging more now than I did when I started. So yes, I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Yes. On the shifting gears to looking back at the journey,
Yeah.
and if you can give me, I would love both, but you can start with whatever one. Lowest time, hardest time in your life, especially related to mental health, and then also highest time of your life. Like, what was the biggest accomplishment? And then the follow up questions on whatever that high point was, how long did that high last? And was it as good as you thought it was? And then on the low side, what did you do to get out of that rut? And what would your actionable advice to be to somebody else that is in,
Yeah.
one of those valleys of life?
Yeah. When I was in Arizona, I reached a point where I was struggling, and this is before I went full time in my business.
Mhm.
And I realized that I could no longer afford the home that I bought. And so I decided to start renting it out as an Airbnb all year long. And sometimes I would stay with friends, sometimes I would sleep in my car. And I slept in my car for an entire winter. And I I got very resourceful and I knew it wouldn't last forever. So I still did it with a smile on my face. And whenever something came up, it was a challenge. It's like, okay, what do I do here now? What do I do now? I felt like I was walking through a maze. I knew that the maze had a finish, but sometimes when you go through a maze, you'll take a wrong turn and you'll hit a dead end and you have to turn back around and remember where you were. A little bit of that was going on. But I realized this wasn't going to last forever. The pendulum swings both ways. When you're really, really low, it'll swing back to the center. When you're really, really high, it'll eventually swing back to the center. So when you ask me about my highest moment, a couple of years ago, like I mentioned, business was rocking and rolling, and it was my best income year ever. And I knew that either it was going to continue to go up or I might regress. I mean, it's a roller coaster. You're never going to have the arrow going up every single time. Eventually things will normalize, right? Or you'll hit a center. And so the whole idea is, what can I do next? If I evaluate where I am, I just have to figure out what's next. In fact, Brian Tracy has a very good strategy, and I shared this on my show last week. If you have a goal, let's just say your goal is to make $100,000 a year or 500,000 or whatever your goal is, write that at the top of your page and then number your page 1 through 20 and come up with that many answers. And so if your goal is to make, let's just say $100,000 a year, how can I make $100,000 a year this year? Well, you write down your answers. Your first 4 or 5 should be easy, but then it starts getting hard. Now you have to start getting really creative. And don't give up until you get to number 20, because that one might actually be the best one. And write down everything without evaluating. And when your list is done, look at the 2 or 3 that you can do right now and start doing those things. And it's a brilliant strategy. Brian Tracy is a brilliant author, and he's one of my favorites.
Was that from one of his books?
Yes.
What do you remember which book? I've read a few of his books, and his Psychology of Selling was the first
Yeah.
sales book I ever read, and I
Yeah.
fell in love with Brian Tracy. But I don't remember if I've read that one or not, or
Create
that.
Your Own Future.
Okay, nope, I haven't.
Create Your Own Future. Great book.
Yeah, Brian Tracy, big fan of his. Jumping into the car, I
Mm-hmm.
want to focus on that.
Mm-hmm.
We have, it's very easy to operate out of fear, and at least in my experience, I typically operate out of fear from loss. I mean, it's fear of not having enough, and
Mm-hmm.
then so you go get all this stuff, right? That the house, the car, the whatever, and then you operate out of fear of not losing it. And I think there's something so beautiful and such a good learning experience of losing it, because then you realize, like, wait, why was I so fearful of losing? And it's not, I mean, you didn't lose your house, right? You were
No.
renting out to other people, but
Right.
you lost the comfort of your own room, whatever we want
Mm-hmm.
to call it,
Mm-hmm.
and you were fine. I mean, I'm not gonna say it was great, but like, you lived. And then for me, when I have those down experiences, I'm like, oh, I actually don't need a nice car, because I ran over something on the freeway, and Teslas take a freaking month and they give you a shitty rental car. And legitimately within 24 hours, I don't even notice that I'm not driving a Tesla anymore. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I don't need all that shit. It's
Mm-hmm.
nice, but I don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, I guess my question in that is, do you agree with that? Do you feel like there's a benefit looking back, like, I did it before and I was
Mm-hmm.
fine. I could sleep in a car if I need to save some
Mm-hmm.
extra money for XYZ.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an anchor moment. If I can survive this, then I can do anything. It's an anchor moment.
Yeah, there's Tony Robbins says, ice baths are huge right now, and he's like, I've been doing them every morning for a decade, and he said there's something special about telling yourself you're going to do something hard and then just doing it, right? I mean, he's having a micro anchor moment every single morning of, and I do ice baths as well. And when I heard that, I'm like, oh, I need to look at this differently. Like, I need to be more proud of myself for doing something hard, even though it's 3 minutes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, big believer in that. Jumping over to the high moment,
Yeah.
my experience has typically been, I'm going to feel a certain way when I achieve this goal. You
Mm-hmm.
achieve the goal, maybe you feel that good. Typically, it's a little bit less than what you thought, but
Mm-hmm.
almost every time it's a much shorter period than what you
Yeah.
thought. And then you immediately have to set the next goal, and then you just right over the rat race. So, you finish the year, highest income year yet, or whenever that moment that you realize, like, hell yeah, I kicked ass this year.
Mm-hmm.
How was that emotion compared to what you thought it was? And how long did it last compared to how long you thought it was going to last?
It was a big moment. It was an emotional moment for me. But then when the next year started rolling around, you realize, okay, I'm at zero. Anything I did last year really doesn't matter anymore.
Yep.
Because not only I have to, well, first of all, I have to fulfill all the jobs that I sold, and I have to keep fishing. I have to keep
Mm.
planting. I have to keep sowing, and then I get to keep reaping. So the the process continues. The process continues because if you stop sowing, you're not going to have anything to reap later. You
Would you
can't just
agree
rest
that
on what you've done.
exactly? would you agree that there's this mentality out there that when I hit six figures or whatever that number is, then everything's going to be easier? I,
Yeah.
I feel like most people think that, and I haven't found anybody that really, when you analyze it, that that's a true statement, but yet that's how we all operate. One
Yeah.
day I'm going to have it all figured out. All my problems are going to be solved, and that just doesn't ever happen. But
Right.
love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, when you've done it once, you have to do it again because now you've proven to yourself that you can, and you can't go back to where you were and be happy. So
Uh,
now that I've tasted that, I want to get back there again, and I certainly can. And so sometimes when economic conditions change, sometimes when your potential customer base changes or there's a shift somewhere, you have to figure out what your next step is. Maybe there's a pivot. Maybe you're adding a new product line. Maybe you're focusing on something that might be more profitable. Maybe you're just focusing on a completely different thing. And maybe you realize that the people that you've been marketing to, if they can't afford what you're doing anymore, maybe you need to be marketing yourself to a different set of customers. If you've raised your prices, you better be marketing yourself to people who can afford to pay you, because the people you've been marketing yourself to before may not be able to afford your new price. So
yeah, and I mean,
now you need a new set of people to talk to.
yep, and it really does come back down to the progression, like that you if you're not progressing, if you win the lottery, you have $1 billion, and you think your all your problems are now solved,
Mhm.
the number one problem probably isn't solved, and that is our drive for progression. Like we don't
Right.
feel fulfilled unless we're progressing. So it doesn't matter what we achieve, we always have to go for more.
Hmm.
I think the key there is to detach yourself from the outcome
Yeah.
of that goal. Still set the
Right.
goals, still strive for them because that's where you get fulfillment. But if you don't hit it, that's okay because
Right.
you're not always going to hit it.
Right. I think entrepreneurs, by their very nature, want to take the next step toward the top, and anything that takes you backwards is a massive letdown. And they
Yep.
start to think, well, what happened? And the really good entrepreneurs will accept complete responsibility for what happened. No matter what's going on out there in the world, you ultimately have the responsibility. What did I not do? Or what did I do wrong? Or what didn't I do enough of?
As entrepreneurs, myself included, yourself included, need to remember that if things aren't going exactly the way, like maybe the market's not right. Don't use it for an excuse to stop trying and innovating and all that, but give yourself grace. I want to point out to everybody the alignment from this whole conversation. And obviously, it's not like we're talking before this. We started off by me saying, Brian, you gave me a shit ton of confidence. You're the man. Thank you. And then we moved into your career, which I didn't know about. And the verbiage you used about empowering others and helping others tell their story all the way wraps it. And then it leads to the career of ghostwriting. And then it leads directly to the legacy. And again, nothing, none of that was planned. You could have said different topics on either, on all of those different aspects, but it just aligns perfectly. And I want to point that out and one, congratulate you with that because that's a beautiful thing. I'm sure that feels amazing to hold on to that when, the other things in life aren't going great. It's like, okay, but I am aligned. And I do know what I'm trying to do. I know what the end goal is and I know what the legacy is, and I'm doing it. So, and if you could just do that, and if everybody could just do that, what a change we would see. And that's such, thank you so much for your time.